The screams of Father Michael Donahue echoed through St. Augustine's Church, but no one outside its walls could hear him. His body hung suspended 3 feet above the altar, arms outstretched in a mockery of crucifixion. The priest's cassock had been shredded, revealing pale flesh beneath. As Ed Warren watched in horror, Father Donahue's skin began to peel away in long, ribbon-like strips that defied gravity, floating upward toward the vaulted ceiling. Each strip revealed pulsing muscle tissue beneath, marked with glowing symbols that seemed to burn from within. "My God," Lorraine Warren whispered, clutching her rosary so tightly that her knuckles blanched white. The church around them had transformed. The crucifix behind the altar now burned upside down, casting an unnatural crimson light throughout the sanctuary. The wooden pews had somehow affixed themselves to the ceiling, their shadows stretching down like grasping fingers. The holy water in the font near the entrance bubbled and hissed, emitting a sulphurous steam that coiled through the air like living tendrils. Ed took a careful step forward, his worn leather Bible held before him like a shield. "Whatever you're seeing isn't real, Father," he called out, his voice steady despite the impossible scene before him. "It's showing you what it wants. Fight it." The priest's head snapped toward Ed with a crack that suggested bones breaking. His eyes had become obsidian pools that reflected no light. "He's beyond your help, Mr. Warren," said a voice that didn't belong to Father Donahue, voice layered with multiple tones, as if several people were speaking in perfect unison. Jessica Winters stood in the center of the church, directly beneath the inverted pews. The 16-year-old should have been a picture of innocence in her white dress, but her neck bent at an impossible angle, her head nearly touching her back. Black fluid dripped from her eyes like tears of pitch, cutting dark rivulets down her pale cheeks. Her mouth stretched into a smile too wide for a human face. "We've been waiting for you," Jessica said, her voice still that unnatural chorus. "You're just in time for the opening." The marble floor beneath her bare feet began to crack, fissures spreading outward in a perfect circle. As the stone split apart, Ed realized he wasn't seeing the church foundation beneath. Instead, a swirling vortex of darkness opened up, and within it, hundreds of faces contorted in silent screams. Hands reached upward from the abyss, grasping at the edges of reality. "Ed, the perimeter." Lorraine cried out, her psychic sensitivity overwhelming her as the veil between worlds thinned. Blood began to trickle from her nose, and she staggered backward. "It's breaking through." Jessica's body began to rise, hovering above the growing portal. The black fluid now poured from her eyes, mouth, and ears, but instead of falling downward, it flowed upward, forming intricate patterns in the air that matched the symbols carved into Father Donahue's exposed flesh. 7 doors to open, 7 souls to take, Jessica intoned. The first was given freely. She gestured to Father Donahue, whose peeled skin now formed a grotesque halo around his suspended form. Ed lunged forward, holy water vial in one hand, blessed crucifix in the other, reciting the prayer of Saint Michael. The air around Jessica shimmered as he approached, reality itself seeming to bend and distort. "Ed, don't touch her," Lorraine screamed, her eyes wide with a terrible vision. "It's not contained yet. If you break the circle," the church doors slammed shut with a thunderous boom that shook dust from the rafters. The candles on the altar flared up suddenly, their flames stretching toward the ceiling like grasping fingers. Jessica's head rotated a full 180 degrees to face Ed, that too wide smile now on the wrong side of her head. "The Warrens," she said, her voice dropping to a guttural whisper that somehow filled the entire church. "We've been expecting you." After all, her hand rose, pointing to something behind him. "You brought the final key." Ed turned, already, knowing with sinking horror what he would see. The twins, Elias and Emma Winters, stood in the doorway hand in hand, their eyes glazed and vacant. In perfect unison, they whispered, "The door is open now. They're coming through." Father Donahue's body suddenly convulsed, his back arching impossibly as his chest split open from sternum to navel. Rather than blood and viscera, a blinding light poured from within him, casting monstrous, shifting shadows across the walls of the church. "Too late," Jessica said, as the floor beneath her crumbled entirely, the portal widening. "The first doorway is already open." The light from Father Donahue's chest intensified, until it was unbearable to look at directly. Just before Ed shielded his eyes, he glimpsed something emerging from within the priest's body, something with too many limbs, moving in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. The last thing Ed heard before the light consumed everything was Lorraine's voice, suddenly clear and commanding. "Remember the pattern, Ed. It's the same as Amityville but worse. This isn't a haunting. It's an invasion." Everything went black. 72 hours earlier, ... Eleanor Winters stood at the kitchen window, watching her daughter Jessica walk across the overgrown yard toward the converted church they now called home. The morning light caught the stained glass windows, casting prismatic patterns across the girl's thin frame. It should have been beautiful. It wasn't. Something about those colors seemed wrong, tainted. Eleanor had been noticing things like that more often lately. "She's been sleepwalking again," Richard said, appearing silently behind her. Her husband's footsteps never made a sound anymore, not since they'd moved here 3 months ago. His mortician's hands rested on her shoulders, cool and dry. "I found her at the cellar door last night. 3rd time this week." Eleanor tensed beneath his touch. "Did she remember anything this time?" Richard's grip tightened slightly. "She said someone was calling her from underneath the floor." The converted church had come onto the market suddenly after a suspicious fire had damaged the rectory, claiming the life of Father Michael Donahue. The price had been too good to refuse, especially with Richard's mortuary business struggling. He'd become obsessed with the property the moment he saw the listing, calling it perfect, meant to be their salvation. Eleanor had hated it. "On sight, Mum." Jessica stood in the doorway now, her long dark hair partially obscuring her face. At 16, she transformed from a vibrant child into a sullen teenager seemingly overnight, plagued by nightmares that left her screaming. Most nights, my hands hurt again. Jessica extended her palms upward. The symbols were there, again intricate patterns etched into her skin that resembled ancient script. They'd first appeared a month ago. The doctor had diagnosed them as urticaria skin writing syndrome, but Eleanor had noticed how the patterns disappeared within hours, healing unnaturally fast, only to reappear with different designs days later. "Let me see," Richard said, moving toward his daughter with an eagerness that made Eleanor's stomach clench. He'd been documenting the marks, photographing them meticulously, for medical records, he claimed. From upstairs came the sound of the twins' synchronized laughter, Elias and Emma, 8 years old and identical in ways that went beyond their physical appearance. They finished each other's sentences, fell ill on the same days, and sometimes spoke in perfect unison without seeming to realize it. "The hungry ones are awake again," they called down in their matched voices. "They want to play with Jessica," Richard smiled thinly. Just their imagination. Eleanor wasn't so sure. Last week, she'd found their sketchbooks filled with drawings of elongated figures emerging from the ground's spindly limbs and too many fingers, all reaching toward a girl who could only be Jessica. When questioned, the twins had simply smiled and said, "That's what we see when we close our eyes." At dinner that night, Eleanor watched her family with mounting unease. Richard had barely touched the renovation work he'd promised the real estate agent except in the basement. There, where the old confessional had once stood, he worked tirelessly, reinforcing the ancient stone walls and installing a heavy door to the sealed cellar beneath. The door with 7 locks that Jessica kept sleepwalking toward. "Found another dead animal this morning," Eleanor said quietly as she served the pasta, "by the old cemetery stones at the edge of the property." Richard didn't look up. "Probably coyotes." It was arranged, Richard, in a pattern. She didn't mention that she recognized the pattern from her religious studies years ago, before she'd abandoned her faith, the ancient symbol for offering. "That's the 4th this month." Jessica pushed her food around her plate listlessly. "I can hear them at night," she whispered, "scratching at the walls. They say they've been waiting for me." "There's nothing in the walls," Richard insisted though. His eyes darted toward the basement door. "This house is just settling." "Not the house," Jessica said, looking directly at her father with an intensity that made him flinch. "The church. It remembers what happened here." The twins, seated side by side, had been unnaturally quiet. Now they spoke in perfect harmony. "The stones in the garden are breathing again. We counted 7 of them in a circle." Eleanor's fork clattered to her plate. "What stones?" Richard interjected sharply. "That's enough. There are no stones, no voices, no scratching. This is a perfectly normal house." "But Dad," Emma said, her voice suddenly her own, "you told us this was a special place. You said our family belonged here. You said we were chosen." A heavy silence fell across the table. Richard's face had gone pale. "I never said that," he whispered, but his eyes betrayed him. Later, Eleanor slipped outside with a flashlight. The old church cemetery stretched behind their property, mostly removed when the building had been deconsecrated, but a few markers remained. She swept her light across the overgrown grass until she found what she was looking for: 7 stones, arranged in a perfect circle. Not grave markers, something older. She knelt to examine one, brushing away decades of moss to reveal carvings that matched the symbols on Jessica's palms. The beam of her flashlight caught something else: fresh dirt, recently disturbed. Eleanor dug with her fingers until they closed around a small cloth pouch. Inside was dark soil mixed with what looked like bone fragments and teeth, not animal, but human. She dropped it with a strangled cry, backing away. But before she could flee, her light flickered across the central stone, revealing a name freshly carved: Jessica. That night, Eleanor lay awake beside her sleeping husband, listening to the sounds of their settling house. Except houses didn't settle with rhythmic precision. Houses didn't sound like distant chanting. And houses certainly didn't speak names in hushed, reverent tones. "Not a house," she whispered to herself, echoing Jessica's words. "A church. And it remembers." From Jessica's room came a thud, followed by the familiar sound of bare feet padding across hardwood. Sleepwalking again. Eleanor slipped from bed to follow her daughter, surprised to find Richard already gone from his side. She found them both in the basement. Jessica stood before the cellar door, all 7 locks undone, her hand on the knob. Richard watched from the shadows, making no move to stop her. "What's happening to us?" Eleanor demanded, her voice breaking the strange tableau. Richard turned to her, his eyes reflecting the dim light oddly, pupils narrowed to vertical slits. "Not happening," he said, with a smile that stretched wide. "Returning. We're finally returning to our purpose." The cellar door swung open, revealing not a room, but a staircase that descended far deeper than the house's foundation should allow, disappearing into darkness that seemed to swallow the light itself. "She's ready now," Richard said, placing his hand on Jessica's shoulder. "The worthy vessel." Jessica turned, her eyes vacant, palms bleeding fresh symbols. "The hungry ones are waiting for me," she said in a voice not entirely her own. "It's time to open the first door." From upstairs came the sound of the twins, speaking a language that no child should know, and Eleanor realized with dawning horror that whatever had been haunting her family hadn't invaded their home. They had brought it with them. The Winters family sat around the dinner table the following evening, an island of forced normalcy in a rising sea of horror. Eleanor had spent the day hiding the pouch she'd found, making frantic calls to her estranged brother, priest who refused to even speak of their new home. Richard had disappeared for hours at his mortuary, returning with dirt beneath his fingernails and a vacant smile. The twins had been inseparable all day, whispering in corners. "Who'd like to say grace?" Richard asked, his voice painfully cheerful as he surveyed the roast chicken Eleanor had prepared. Before anyone could respond, the twins sat down there, forks with synchronized precision. They tilted their heads at identical angles and fixed their gaze on Jessica. "The worthy vessel sits among us," they said in perfect unison. "She will open the way." Blood began to seep from their eyes, dark, rivulets streaking down their cherubic faces. "Elias, Emma." Eleanor cried, leaping to her feet. The twins ignored her, continuing their chant, now in flawless Latin: asterisk porta septem, animas septem, primum ostium apertum est, asterisk 7 doors, 7 souls. The first door is open. The blood flowed freely now, staining their white collars crimson, as they maintained their eerie synchronization. Yet neither child appeared to be in pain. Their expressions remained blank, almost beat. Richard made no move to help them. Instead, he gripped his steak knife and began carving into the wooden tabletop, his movements mechanical and precise. Eleanor watched in horror as symbols emerged beneath his blade identical to those that had appeared on Jessica's palms. "Richard, stop this." Eleanor grabbed his wrist, but his strength was unnatural. He continued carving as if she weren't there. Jessica sat motionless, staring at the display before her. "Mum," she whispered finally, "I need to tell you something." Eleanor turned to her daughter, desperate for any semblance of normalcy. "The birds," Jessica said softly. "The dead birds Dad's been hiding from you. They're everywhere, hundreds of them, all with their eyes pecked out." Eleanor's breath caught. "What birds?" "Behind the house, by the stone circle. A new one appears every hour. Dad collects them before you wake up." Jessica's voice remained unnaturally calm. "I've been watching him through my window. He arranges them in patterns on the ground, then digs shallow graves." Richard's hand suddenly stilled. The knife clattered to the table as he slumped forward, his body rigid, eyes staring, unblinking at some middle distance. "He's listening to them," the twins said, blood now pooling on the table beneath their chins. "The hungry ones are giving him instructions." A violent tremor passed through the house, not an earthquake, but something more localized, as if the building itself was shuddering in anticipation. Jessica's head snapped back suddenly, her spine arching in a seizure. Her chair toppled as she rose into the air, her body levitating 3 feet above the dining room floor. Her limbs contorted, bending backward until her heels nearly touched. The back of her head in an impossible display of flexibility. Jessica, Eleanor screamed, lunging toward her daughter. Richard's hand shot out, gripping Eleanor's wrist with bruising force. "Don't interfere," he hissed, his voice layered with something ancient. "She's fulfilling her purpose." Jessica's mouth opened unnaturally wide, her jaw dislocating with an audible crack. Multiple voices emerged, simultaneously male, female, young, old, all speaking through her at once. Asterisk, the 7th seal weakens. The worthy vessel prepares. We have waited centuries for this alignment. Asterisk, her body rotated slowly in the air, limbs still grotesquely contorted. Asterisk, we approach the breaking through. 7 doors, 7 keys, 7 sacrifices. The first was the holy man who tried to stop us. The second comes soon. Asterisk, Eleanor wrenched her arm free from Richard's grasp and stumbled backward, colliding with the wall. Her fingers found the cross she still kept in her pocket, a remnant of her abandoned faith. She clutched it desperately. "What have you done to my family?" she demanded, her voice breaking. Jessica's suspended form convulsed violently, her spine bending at an impossible angle as more voices poured forth. Asterisk, your family was chosen generations ago. The Mortician's bloodline has served us faithfully. The twins are our anchors. The girl is our door. Asterisk. With a final, violent shudder, Jessica collapsed to the floor in a heap of tangled limbs. The bloody tears stopped flowing from the twins, eyes simultaneously. Richard slumped in his chair, unconscious. In the sudden silence, Eleanor could hear a new sound, the basement door slowly creaking open. She rushed to Jessica, cradling her daughter's limp form. "Jessica, baby, can you hear me?" Jessica's eyes fluttered open, bloodshot and dilated. "Mum," she whispered, "I saw what's coming through. It's already taken Father Donahue. He isn't dead, he's worse than dead." A thunderous crash drew Eleanor's attention to the basement. With Jessica still in her arms, she approached the doorway and peered down the stairs. The heavy cellar door that Richard had installed, the one with 7 locks hung from a single hinge, broken open from within. Beyond it lay not the small storage space the realtor had described, but a stone staircase descending far deeper than the house's foundation should allow, illuminated by an unnatural phosphorescence that pulsed like a heartbeat. From those depths came a sound, not quite a voice, not quite a growl, calling Jessica's name with terrible intimacy. The twins appeared beside Eleanor, their faces clean of blood, but eyes hollow with knowledge no child should possess. "The first door is open now," they whispered in unison. 6 more to go. Richard stirred behind them, rising to his feet with fluid grace that wasn't his own. When he spoke, his voice carried echoes of countless others. "It's too late to run, Eleanor. The breaking point has passed. Now we prepare for their arrival." Jessica convulsed in her mother's arms, her back arching again as fresh symbols began to appear on her skin, burning from within like brands. "Call the Warrens," she gasped through the pain. "They're the only ones who can stop this." Father Thomas Riley stood on the rectory steps of St. Mary's Church, a full mile from the Winters' home, yet he refused to come any closer. The rain had begun without warning, biblical downpour that drenched Eleanor within seconds as she pleaded with her brother. "They're my family, Thomas, my children. Whatever's happening, they need help. The priest's face remained impassive, raindrops beating on his glasses. That place isn't just haunted, Ellie. It's poisoned ground. The church has records dating back to the colonial era. Why do you think the diocese was so eager to and sell it? Then help me find someone who can help. Eleanor shouted over the thunderclap that followed. Jessica is. She couldn't bring herself to describe what she'd witnessed. Father Thomas sighed, the weight of his decision visible in the slump of his shoulders. He retreated inside briefly, returning with a worn business card. Edward and Lorraine Warren, he said, passing it to her. Demonologists, the church doesn't officially sanction their work, but when priests won't go somewhere... He trailed off, glancing nervously in the direction of Eleanor's home. Thomas, what do you know about that place? Her brother's eyes met hers, fear evident behind his glasses. I know Father Donahue was researching its history before he died. I know he called it a doorway not meant to be opened, and I know he begged the diocese to destroy the building entirely rather than sell it. The rain continued its relentless assault as Eleanor drove home. Yet she noticed with growing unease that the deluge seemed to avoid the old church steeple that still rose above their converted home. A perfect circle of dry ground surrounded the property, as if the water itself refused to touch it. The Warrens arrived 36 hours later. Eleanor had managed to keep Richard subdued with sleeping pills crushed into his food, a desperate measure that bought her time to hide Jessica and the twins at a neighbor's house. But they'd returned, drawn back to the property by what Jessica described as an invisible leash tightening round my throat. She watched from the window as the modest station wagon pulled into their driveway. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind an unnatural stillness. A tall man in his 50s emerged first. Ed Warren, dressed in a button-down shirt with rolled sleeves, carrying a worn leather case. His wife, Lorraine, followed, petite with kind eyes that belied the determined set of her jaw. She carried a black doctor's bag and wore a simple gold crucifix. Richard stirred on the couch as the doorbell rang. "They're here," he mumbled, eyes still clouded from the sedatives. "They can't stop what's coming." Eleanor rushed to the door before he could rise. Ed Warren's handshake was firm, grounding after days of nightmare. "Mrs. Winters," he said, his voice carrying the working-class cadence of his native New England. "I'm Ed Warren. This is my wife Lorraine. Father Thomas explained you're experiencing a severe haunting." "It's more than that," Eleanor began, but her words were cut short by Lorraine's sudden gasp. The moment Lorraine Warren crossed the threshold, her body went rigid, her eyes rolled back, showing only whites as she gripped the doorframe for support. Ed caught her before she could fall, his practiced movements suggesting this wasn't uncommon. "Lorraine," he asked, concern evident in his voice. "So many," Lorraine whispered, her body trembling violently. "Hundreds buried beneath. Their mouths," she retched suddenly, doubling over. Something filled their mouths with communion wafers, soaked in blood. A mockery, a desecration. Ed guided his wife to a chair, while Eleanor watched in horrified fascination. Lorraine's psychic sensitivity was clearly genuine. She couldn't possibly know about the parish records Richard had found documenting a mass grave beneath the original church foundation. "I'm sorry," Lorraine said after a moment, color slowly returning to her face. "Sometimes the impressions are overwhelming." Ed unpacked his case methodically, removing a wooden crucifix, several vials of holy water, and a worn Bible. Eleanor watched in shock as the wood of the crucifix began to age before her eyes, the fresh pine darkening, cracking, becoming gnarled, and ancient in minutes. The metal corpus tarnished instantly, turning green, then black. Ed stared at the crucifix in alarm. "I've never seen that happen before," he muttered, setting it aside. He uncapped a vial of holy water, only to find it had turned viscous and dark, like congealed blood. Lorraine's hand closed over her husband's. "Ed," she whispered, "this location, it's on our watch list." Eleanor's eyes widened. "What watch list?" Ed hesitated before answering. "We keep files on locations with documented paranormal significance that haven't been fully investigated. This church has been in our records for years, but no demonologist has ever completed a full assessment." "Why not?" Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. "Because they either left abruptly or didn't leave at all," Lorraine said softly, like Father Donahue. A crash from upstairs interrupted them. Richard appeared at the top of the stairs, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, as if his body were being operated by someone unfamiliar with its mechanics. "The Warrens," he slurred, his pupils visibly contracting into vertical slits, even from a distance. "The famous demonologists. Do you really think your toys will work here? This isn't one of your little haunted dollhouses." Ed stood, positioning himself between Richard and the women. "You know who we are, so you know what we can do." Richard's laugh was hollow, resonating at a frequency that made the windows vibrate. "You've never faced anything like what dwells beneath this house. We've been waiting centuries for this alignment. The first door is already open." Lorraine clutched her rosary, wincing. "Ed, there's more than one entity here. I can sense a presence that predates Christianity itself." The lights flickered as Richard descended the stairs, his movements becoming more fluid, more predatory. "7 doors, 7 souls," he intoned. "The worthy vessel prepares." The front door burst open as Jessica and the twins returned, drawn back to the house by forces they couldn't resist. Jessica's eyes were wide with terror as she stumbled inside, followed by the eerily calm twins. "I couldn't stay away," she gasped. "It's pulling me back." Lorraine crossed to Jessica immediately, taking the girl's hands in hers. The moment they touched, both women stiffened as if electrified. Jessica's eyes rolled back, mirroring Lorraine's earlier reaction. "You see it?" "Two," Jessica whispered. "The doorway. The hungry ones waiting to come through." Ed quickly set up surveillance, equipment cameras, audio recorders, electromagnetic field detectors, while Richard watched with amused detachment. Night was falling, casting long shadows through the windows. "We'll need to conduct interviews with each family member," Ed explained to Eleanor. "Document the phenomena, establish patterns." "There isn't time," Eleanor said desperately. "Something's happening in the basement. That staircase, it shouldn't exist. The cellar is only supposed to be a small storage space, but now it goes down. I don't know how far down." As night settled fully over the house, the surveillance equipment activated. Every clock in the house began running backwards simultaneously. On the audio recorder, clear as day despite no one speaking, came Jessica's voice, opening the way. "They're waiting for me to open the way." The twins, sitting motionless on the couch, suddenly spoke in perfect unison. "The tall shadows with too many teeth are coming closer. They want to wear us like clothes." Richard's smile stretched unnaturally wide as he regarded the Warrens. "You're already too late. The first door opened when Father Donahue tried to burn our little project to the ground. His soul was quite ... nutritious." Ed and Lorraine exchanged a grave look that confirmed Eleanor's worst fears. "Mrs. Winters," Ed said quietly, your family, isn't just experiencing a haunting. Your home is becoming a doorway to something that should never enter our world. The Warrens worked with practiced efficiency, transforming the Winters' living room into a command center. Camera equipment, audio recorders, religious artifacts, and reference materials covered every surface. Ed had insisted on separate interviews, isolating each family member to prevent cross-contamination of testimonies. Eleanor sat across from Lorraine, clutching a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, bringing with it an oppressive silence. No crickets chirped, no nocturnal birds called. Even the wind had died, as if nature itself were holding its breath. "When did you first notice something was wrong?" Lorraine asked gently. "The moment we arrived," Eleanor admitted, but Richard was so insistent that this was our fresh start. He'd been having dreams about this place for months. Before it went on the market, said he could see every room in perfect detail before we ever set foot inside. Lorraine's pen stilled. Dreams about a property before it was available. That's significant. Was he specifically drawn to any particular area? The basement. From day one, he's been obsessed with that basement. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. The realtor told us it was just a small storage space with a dirt floor, but now there's a stone staircase going down ... impossibly deep. In the dining room, Ed was interviewing Richard, whose demeanor oscillated between drugged lethargy and moments of unsettling lucidity. The EMF detector between them spiked erratically. "Tell me about your work, Mr. Winters," Ed prompted. "The dead don't bother me," Richard replied, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've prepared hundreds of bodies. They're vessels, emptied and ready for something new." Ed made a note. "And when did you first feel drawn to this property?" Richard's eyes momentarily cleared, genuine confusion crossing his face. I don't remember seeing the listing. I just remember knowing we had to live here." His voice dropped as he leaned forward. "Sometimes I wake up and I'm standing in the basement, holding tools I don't remember getting. My hands covered in dirt that smells like ... not earth. Something older." His pupils suddenly constricted to vertical slits again. "But that's all according to plan, isn't it? The worthy bloodline preparing the way. My ancestor understood the honor of being chosen." "Your ancestor?" Ed asked carefully. Richard's smile widened unnaturally. "The vessels change, but the blood remembers its purpose." Upstairs, Lorraine sat with the twins in their bedroom. 8-year-olds Elias and Emma Winters sat side by side on their bed. Identical in their pale blue pajamas, their expressions unnervingly blank. "The drawings you've been making," Lorraine said, indicating the sketchbooks open between them. "Can you tell me about them?" "The tall shadows with too many teeth," Elias began. "They live under the house, but not under the house," Emma continued seamlessly. In the space between spaces, they finished in unison. The drawings showed elongated, spindly figures emerging from what appeared to be tears, in reality jagged holes in the fabric of the world. In every drawing, the figures reached toward a central female form that could only be Jessica. "And when did you start seeing these shadows?" Lorraine asked. "We've always seen them," Emma said. "But they were far away before," Elias added. "Now they're coming closer," they concluded together. "They want to wear us like clothes." As if responding to their words, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost crystallized on the windows, in intricate patterns that mimicked the symbols found throughout the house. In Jessica's room, Ed sat before the teenager, his recorder capturing every word. The girl was pale, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept in days. "I dream about being pregnant," Jessica said without prompting, her voice hollow. "But not with a baby, with something that speaks to me from inside. It promises to make me famous, says I'll be remembered as the mother of a new age." Ed kept his expression neutral despite his growing alarm. "And these marks on your hands, when did they first appear?" Jessica extended her palms, revealing fresh symbols etched into her skin. "They burn themselves in while I sleep. Different patterns every time, but they always fade within hours." She looked up, her eyes desperate. "Mr. Warren, something's inside me, trying to get out. I can feel it moving." "When did these symptoms begin?" Ed asked, careful to maintain a clinical approach despite the horror of her description. "After. Dad brought home dirt from the cemetery where he works. He buried something in the basement. I watched from the stairs. He didn't look like himself." Jessica's voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes I see another face behind his face. Someone old, someone hungry." A crash from downstairs interrupted them. They rushed to find Richard convulsing on the dining room floor, his back arched at an impossible angle. Eleanor and Lorraine stood frozen in shock as Richard's mouth opened, wider than humanly possible, emitting a sound that fluctuated between a man's scream and something ancient and inhuman. "Get back," Ed commanded, pulling Jessica behind him. Richard's body went limp suddenly. Then he sat up with fluid, unnatural grace. When he spoke, his voice had changed, completely cultured, archaic, with an accent Ed couldn't place. "Edward Warren," Richard said, though it clearly wasn't Richard speaking. "Demonologist, religious zealot, amateur meddler in affairs beyond your comprehension." Ed stepped forward, crucifix in hand. "Who are you?" "The thing wearing," Richard smiled. "I am the caretaker of the doorway, the guardian of the 7 seals, the worthy vessel's ancestor who first heard their call centuries ago." "Their call?" Lorraine asked, her psychic senses straining to comprehend the entity before her. "Those who wait beyond, those who hunger for your reality." Richard's head rotated slowly, joints cracking, until he faced Jessica. "And you've brought me the final key, the girl born under the perfect alignment, with the perfect bloodline." The EMF detectors screamed as the electricity in the house surged. Light bulbs exploded in showers of glass. "Enough," Ed commanded, holding his Bible before him. "In the name of Jesus Christ," Richard laughed, the sound echoing at impossible. "Engels, your Christ has no domain here, Warren. This ground was sacred long before your carpenter God was nailed to his tree. The old ones were worshipped here when your ancestors were still cowering in European caves." Lorraine gasped suddenly, doubling over as her psychic sensitivity overwhelmed her. "Ed," she managed, "I'm seeing imprints rituals performed in that basement spanning centuries. The symbols, they're the same as on Jessica's hands." Ed helped his wife to a chair while keeping his eyes on Richard. "This property," he said to Eleanor, "how old is the foundation?" "The church was built in 1698, Eleanor answered. But the realtor mentioned something about it being constructed over an older structure. Richard's borrowed voice interjected. "The church was built to cap what was already here, to seal the doorway." His unnaturally wide smile returned. "But every prison has a key. Every seal can be broken with the right ... tools." His gaze settled on Jessica again, who clutched her stomach with a pained expression. The twins appeared at the top of the stairs, speaking in their disturbing unison. "The first door is open. The second door waits for the vessel to ripen." Ed exchanged a grave look with Lorraine, who had recovered enough to stand. "This isn't just a standard haunting or possession," he said quietly. "The house itself seems to be built as part of some larger ritual structure with astronomical alignments. The entire property is a machine designed for a specific purpose." "What purpose?" Eleanor whispered. Richard answered instead, his voice resonating with unnatural harmonics. "To open the way, to let them in." He turned to Ed with an expression of mock pity. "Your little religious trinkets won't help you here, Warren. This is older than your god, older than any god you've ever known." The house shuddered around them, as if responding to his words. From the basement came a sound like massive stone doors grinding open. "You should go down and see," Richard suggested, his smile stretching impossibly wide. "The first door is already open. Father Donahue made a lovely first sacrifice." Jessica collapsed suddenly, her body seizing as fresh symbols burned themselves into her exposed skin. Eleanor rushed to her daughter while Ed checked his equipment, which was going haywire, needles pinned at maximum, batteries draining instantly, film fogging in cameras. "Lorraine," Ed said grimly, "we need to document everything before proceeding. Whatever's happening here goes beyond anything we've encountered." Lorraine nodded, her face ashen. "Ed," she whispered so only he could hear, "I don't think we're dealing with a demonic entity." "Then what?" Her eyes met his, filled with a terror he'd never seen in 30 years of facing the darkest supernatural forces. Something that considers demons to be lesser servants. Something that was here before mankind existed. From the basement came the sound of chanting in multiple voices, though no one was down there. At least, no one living. Dawn broke over the winter's property with unnatural sluggishness, as if the light itself struggled to penetrate the oppressive atmosphere. Ed Warren had spent the night poring over the preliminary data, while Lorraine maintained a prayer vigil. They'd sedated Richard with Eleanor's help, securing him in the master bedroom with religious symbols at every possible exit. Jessica hadn't slept. The symbols on her skin now appeared and faded in rhythmic cycles, like breathing. The twins had finally succumbed to exhaustion, though they continued to whisper in their sleep names and dates that Ed carefully recorded. "I need to visit the county records office," Ed told Eleanor over coffee that tasted of ash despite being freshly brewed. "There's something familiar about the architectural layout of this property. I've seen it before." "I'll come with you," Eleanor insisted. "I can't stay here anymore." Lorraine looked up from her journal, where she'd been documenting her psychic impressions. "I'll stay with the children. Whatever's happening, it's accelerating. We can't leave them alone." Ed hesitated, concern for his wife evident. In 30 years of investigating the paranormal, he'd learned to trust Lorraine's instincts above all else. "Be careful," he said, clasping her hand. "If anything changes anything at all, call Father Thomas." Lorraine smiled thinly. "We both know he won't come, but I'll be fine." She glanced toward the basement door, now sealed with blessed tape. "It's trying to conserve energy for something. I can feel it gathering strength." The Rockbridge County Historical Society occupied a modest colonial building in town. The archivist, a severe woman named Mrs. Pembroke, eyed Ed's credentials with skepticism. "Demonologist? Is that even a real profession, Mr. Warren?" "I assure you it is, ma'am," Ed replied with practiced patience. "We're researching the history of the old St. Augustine's Church property." Mrs. Pembroke's expression shifted immediately. "That place," she said, her voice dropping. "Why would anyone want to know about that place?" Eleanor stepped forward. "We lived there. We bought it after the fire. The archivist paled visibly. Then God help you. She disappeared into the archives, returning with several boxes labeled Restricted Access, Episcopal Diocese, Authorization Required. I shouldn't show you these, she said, placing them on the table. But perhaps it's time someone knew the truth. She peered at them over her glasses. I've lived in this town my entire life. Mrs. Winters, my grandmother used to call your property the doorway place. Said the veil was thin there. Ed opened the first box, finding architectural plans for the original church construction dated 1698. Beneath them lay older parchments, hand-drawn plans for a structure labeled in Latin as Templum Observationis, Temple of Watching. These predate the church, Ed murmured, carefully examining the yellowed documents. Look at these foundation designs. They're meant to cap something beneath, not support something above. Eleanor pulled out a bound journal, its leather cover cracked with age. The witness testimony of Reverend Malachi Winters, 1697, she read. Aloud, her voice faltering on the familiar surname. Winters. Ed looked up sharply. Any relation to your husband's family? Eleanor's hands trembled as she opened the journal. Richard never mentioned any family connection to this area. He said his ancestors came from New England. The journal contained the spidery handwriting of a man clearly disturbed by what he had witnessed. Reverend Winters described finding a heathen temple built by a cult calling themselves the Witnesses of the Void, on the site where the church would later stand. The cult had apparently used the location for communicating with entities beyond the veil of stars. Listen to this, Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. The temple sits upon a convergence of terrestrial energies that the heathens believe creates a thinning between our world and realms beyond comprehension. They conducted sacrifices on 7 stone altars arranged in a perfect circle, believing each sacrifice would open one of 7 doors to allow passage of their unholy. Masters Ed was examining another documented list of names and dates spanning centuries. These are disappearances, he realized. 7 people every 27 years, always ending with the religious leader overseeing the property. The cycle, Eleanor whispered. Jessica's 16th birthday is next week. Mrs. Pembroke approached with another box. You'll want to see these too, she said grimly. Police records. 5 previous structures have stood on that property. Each was destroyed in increasingly violent waves: fire, structural collapse, unexplained explosion. Each destruction occurred exactly 27 years after the previous one. Ed's experienced eyes scanned the patterns quickly. The last destruction should have been, he calculated rapidly, 1997. But the church stood until last year, because Father Donahue broke the cycle, Mrs. Pembroke said. He found something during renovations, old copper pipes with symbols etched into them running beneath the foundation. He contacted the diocese immediately and began researching the church's history. She paused, glancing around before continuing in a hushed tone. Father Donahue believed the church itself was designed as a prisoner camp on something trying to break through. From elsewhere. Eleanor felt ice spreading through her veins. The fire that killed him. No body was ever recovered, the archivist replied. Only his clothes, arranged in a perfect circle in the basement. Ed was examining a series of astronomical charts, included with the church's original construction plans. These alignments, he muttered. They're calculating some sort of celestial conjunction that occurs every 27 years. The next one is next week, Eleanor finished. During the new moon, on Jessica's birthday. In another file, they discovered property records tracing ownership through the centuries. With growing horror, Eleanor found Richard's ancestor Winters listed as the original landowner before the church construction. Subsequent Winters family members appeared as church wardens, groundskeepers, or morticians in every generation since. Not random, Ed said grimly. Your husband's family has been custodians of this site for over 3 centuries. The most disturbing discovery came in a folder marked Native American Oral Histories, containing interviews with indigenous elders from the 1930s. They referred to the location by a name that translated roughly to the mouth that devours light, describing it as a place their ancestors had sealed with powerful magic after sky visitors had taught dark rituals to European settlers. The land itself was considered a natural doorway, Ed read aloud. The native tribes avoided it entirely, believing it connected to the hollow places between stars where hungry gods wait. As Eleanor turned the page of Reverend Winter's journal, a yellowed photograph slipped out a daguerreotype from the mid to 1800s showing 7 men in period clothing standing before the church. Despite the antiquated photography, the family resemblance was unmistakable. The central figure could have been Richard's twin. The bloodline, Eleanor whispered. The worthy bloodline. Ed's phone rang, interrupting their research. Lorraine's voice came through, tense and frightened. Ed, you need to come back now. Richard's awake, but it's not Richard anymore. The entity is gaining strength. And Jessica, the line crackled with static. Something's happening to Jessica. Her skin is changing, and she knows things, Ed. Things about Father Donahue that she couldn't possibly know. What kind of things? Ed asked, already gathering their findings. She says he isn't dead. She says he was given as first tribute, and she keeps repeating coordinates, star positions. Ed, the twins have fallen into some kind of synchronized trance. They're drawing on the walls the same symbols from the copper pipes in perfect detail. Lorraine's voice dropped to a whisper. I tried blessing the basement door, but the holy water boiled away before it touched the wood. Whatever's down there, it's awakening. As they rushed to the car, Eleanor froze at a sudden realization. The 7 stone altars the journal mentioned, they're still there. In our garden, Richard has been tending to them, keeping them clear of growth. Ed's expression darkened as the final pieces fell into place. The church wasn't just built to contain whatever's beneath. It's part of the machine. Its dimensions, the placement of windows and doors, they're all designed to channel energy during the alignment. He started the engine. The entire property is a ritual space, and it's being activated. For what purpose? Eleanor asked, dreading the answer. To open a doorway, Ed replied grimly. Not just for a demon or spirit to pass through, but something much worse. Something that needs a worthy vessel to enter our world completely. The implication hung between them as they sped back toward the house. Jessica wasn't just being possessed. She was being prepared as a gateway. Ed and Eleanor returned to find the house transformed. The air had thickened to a syrup-like consistency, and the walls pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm like an enormous heartbeat. Temperature fluctuated, wildly freezing in one room, sweltering in the next. Lorraine, Ed called, his voice muffled in the dense atmosphere. They found her kneeling before Jessica in the living room. The girl sat unnaturally still, her skin marbled with crawling symbols that appeared and disappeared like living tattoos. Religious artifacts formed a protective circle around them. Don't break the circle, Lorraine warned without looking up. It took everything I had to establish this containment. Where are Richard and the twins? Eleanor asked anxiously. The twins are locked upstairs. Richard is in the basement. Or what used to be Richard. A rhythmic pounding began beneath their feet, not fists against wood, but stone striking stone. Lorraine explained she'd placed blessed oil across every threshold, creating a barrier that was weakening by the hour. Jessica's head snapped up, her eyes fixing on Ed with unnerving intensity. "Did you find what you were looking for, Mr. Warren?" she asked, her voice layered with subtle harmonics. "Did you discover why my family was chosen?" "We found connections dating back centuries," Ed replied cautiously. "Your father's ancestors have been custodians of this site since before the church was built." Jessica smiled thinly. "Not custodians, cultivators." Her hand moved to her stomach protectively, growing something precious over generations. "Jessica," Eleanor pleaded, "fight this. Whatever's happening, you can resist it." "Why would I resist my purpose?" Jessica replied, suddenly sounding like herself, again frightened and confused. "Mum, I can see them now, behind the walls, between the spaces. They've always been there, watching us." She looked down at the symbols dancing across her skin. "I understand what they're writing on me. It's a covenant." A thunderous crash came from upstairs the twins' room. Despite Ed's caution to be methodical, Eleanor rushed toward the stairs. The group followed, Ed leading with a blessed crucifix. The twins' door hung from a single hinge, splintered from within. Inside, the walls wept black fluid that formed childlike handprints where it touched the surface, as if small hands were pressing from within the plaster. Elias and Emma sat surrounded by drawings covering every surface, each depicting a female figure suspended in air, her body split open as elongated limbs emerged from within. "They're coming," Elias said without looking up. "They're hungry," Emma added, their crayons moving in perfect synchronization. "They've waited so long, they finished in unison." Lorraine noticed the black handprints recoiling from Ed's crucifix, the fluid retreating into the wall with a sizzling sound. Ed stepped forward, holding the crucifix higher. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to reveal yourself." The temperature plummeted instantly. From downstairs came Jessica's sudden scream, pain and revelation mingled in a single cry. "Too late," the twins said together, their voices suddenly deeper, older. "The first confrontation begins." The house shuddered violently as the foundation shifted. The black fluid on the walls coalesced into a viscous mirror, showing grotesquely distorted reflections, elongated limbs. Too many joints, stretched faces with vertical pupils. Rushing downstairs, they found Jessica standing in the living room, the protection circle broken. She stood with her head tilted at an unnatural angle, speaking in Father Donahue's voice. "They broke me on the altar stone, pulled me apart and repurposed my essence. But I tried to warn you, Ed Warren. I tried to burn it all down before the cycle could complete." "Father Donahue, are you still alive?" Ed asked cautiously. Jessica laughed hollowly. "Alive? No. Given as first tribute. Yes." Her body spasmed, arms splaying impossibly. "They're converting me, molecule by molecule, rebuilding me into something that can exist in the spaces between." "Who are they?" Lorraine demanded. "The Watchers, the Waiting Ones, the Hungry Gods." Jessica rotated slowly, joints cracking. "They've been patient, cultivating the bloodline, preparing the vessel, calculating the alignment." Her gaze fixed on Eleanor. "They first spoke to Jeremiah Winters in 1667, taught him how to bend reality if he would help them enter it." The basement door exploded in a shower of splinters. What emerged was only nominally Richard, his body elongated and bent at impossible angles, skin translucent, revealing pulsing symbols beneath instead of organs. "The worthy vessel speaks truth," the Richard thing said, its voice resonating painfully. The door opens. The first seal is broken. Ed thrust his crucifix forward. "By the power of Christ, I command you." The artifact burst into black flame, scorching his hand. The Richard thing laughter, sound like grinding stone. "Your carpenter god has no dominion here. This consecration predates your religion by eons." The air in the center of the room shimmered, reality thinning. Through the distortion, they glimpsed something vast, moving on the other side, geometries that shouldn't exist. Limbs bending through dimensions beyond human comprehension. Lorraine gasped, overwhelmed by her psychic vision. "Ed, I can see it to manifest through Jessica. The basement isn't just a room. It's a literal threshold between dimensions." Jessica convulsed, her back arching as symbols burned permanently into her flesh, glowing with internal light. "They're changing me," she gasped in her own voice, "making me into something that can survive the transition." The Richard thing circled. Her. The worthy vessel accepts her purpose. The bloodline fulfills its covenant. Ed pulled a different artifact from his Kaiser tarnished silver cross, containing relics from saints who had battled forces beyond human comprehension. He began reciting Aramaic phrases that predated modern Christianity. The air solidified around Jessica, forming a protective barrier. The Richard thing shrieked in rage, flickering between human appearance and something with too many limbs, and a face existing in multiple configurations simultaneously. Then Jessica's eyes snapped open, completely black from corner to corner. She spoke in a language impossible for human vocal cords to produce. The house responded, floorboards curling upward, walls bending inward, the ceiling stretching impossibly high. The protective barrier shattered. Ed's silver cross blackened, the relics crumbling to dust. Consecration reversed, the Richard thing hissed, barrier thinning. The twins descended the stairs with synchronized movements, their eyes now matching Jessica's solid black and depthless. They approached with outstretched hands. The anchors join the vessel. The doorway widens. As their hands touched Jessica, a blast of energy knocked everyone backward. When they regained their senses, Jessica hovered above the floor, her body contorted impossibly. Glowing symbols emerged from her mouth, hanging in the air before dissipating into the walls. The twins stood on either side, rigid, blood trickling from their eyes as they channeled something beyond human comprehension. The Richard thing prostrated itself. The first confrontation is complete. The second door prepares to open. Ed helped Lorraine to her feet. "This isn't a standard possession," he murmured. "We're witnessing a convergence of forces attempting to create a permanent doorway between dimensions." "Not just any doorway," Lorraine whispered, her vision briefly piercing the veil. "A living doorway. They're transforming Jessica into a portal that can move through our world." The things that were once the Winters family turned to face them with identical black eyes, speaking in perfect unison. "You cannot stop what was set in motion centuries ago." The alignment approaches. The vessel ripens. The hunger grows. The walls continued to pulse like living tissue as the house itself became part of whatever. Transformation was underway. Dawn never truly came the next day. A sickly, greyish light refused to penetrate the windows fully, as if the house existed in its own pocket of reality. Ed and Lorraine had retreated to their vehicle with Eleanor. establishing a makeshift command center surrounded by their remaining religious artifacts. The car sat at the edge of the property as far as Eleanor could go, before an invisible force prevented her from leaving. "This isn't a demonic entity," Ed said, his voice hoarse from hours of prayer. Burns marked his hands, where his religious symbols had backfired. "It's something ... older." Loren's normally composed facade had cracked. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and a persistent nosebleed had stained her collar. "I had a vision during the confrontation," she said quietly. "They're not trying to possess the family. They're transforming them into something that can function as a bridgehead for invasion." "What happens to my children if this transformation completes?" Eleanor asked, clutching a family photo. "They won't be your children anymore," Lorraine replied softly. The car's windows suddenly fogged over, symbols appearing in the condensation attached to those on Jessica's skin. Jessica herself appeared outside, her appearance deeply unsettling. Her skin had become translucent with glowing symbols visible beneath. Her completely black eyes somehow conveyed amusement. "The vessel allows us to communicate directly now," said the thing wearing Jessica's form, its voice resonating as if from multiple throats. "The first interface is complete." "What do you want with this family?" Lorraine asked. "Want? We do. Not want in your sense of the word. We simply are. And soon we shall be here." It gestured around them. "This dimension has resources ours does not. Particularly ... souls." "Why Jessica, specifically?" Ed pressed. The worthy vessel was crafted over generations. Bloodlines carefully cultivated, genetic markers preserved. Jessica's body rippled subtly, as if containing something trying to push through. Her birth date aligned with the cosmic conjunction. Suddenly, the black receded from one of Jessica's eyes, revealing her normal brown iris. "Mum," she gasped in her own voice, "they showed me everything. The church, the stones, our family, it was all designed for this moment." She struggled. Visibly, they're opening doorways inside me, restructuring my organs, hollowing me out. "Fight it, Jessica," Eleanor pleaded. "I can't. I'm becoming the door." The blackness swallowed her eye again. 7 doors, 7 souls. The first was the priest. The second will be completed at midnight. The alignment progresses. When they cautiously approached the house again, they found the interior transformed. The walls breathed visibly, expanding and contracting with wet, organic sounds. The floor had developed the texture of living tissue. In the living room, the twins sat back to back, their hands intertwined. Black fluid emerged from their mouths, forming a complex web connecting to the ceiling, walls, and floor. "The anchors stabilized the transformation," came Richard's voice. His transformation had progressed further limbs, elongated grotesquely, skin stretched paper-thin. His face had begun to split along the center, revealing a writhing mass of symbols rather than bone. "The 7 stone altars in the garden have activated. By midnight, the second door will open fully." From upstairs came Jessica's sudden scream. Of revelation, they found her hovering above her bed, her body contorted impossibly. Her spine had curved backward until her head nearly touched her heels, yet her face turned toward them, neck twisted completely around. Her abdomen had distended, the skin translucent, revealing geometric patterns shifting within. "The worthy vessel becomes the living gate," Jessica said in her multi-layered voice. Lorraine gasped, doubling over. "Ed, I can see it now. The church wasn't built to contain what's beneath. It was designed as a focusing lens for cosmic energy. The architectural plans, we found the dimensions. The placement of windows, they're all calibrated to channel energy during this specific alignment. The entire property is a ritual space, Lorraine confirmed, and it's being activated by the conjunction happening in the sky above us. Jessica rotated slowly in the air, black eyes fixed on them. The second door opens soon. The worthy vessel fulfills her covenant. The house shuddered around them as the transformation accelerated. "We need to regroup," Ed insisted, ushering Eleanor and Lorraine back to the relative safety of their vehicle. The house continued its grotesque transformation behind them, the very architecture seeming to warp and breathe. Inside the station wagon, Ed retrieved a locked case from beneath the seat, one they hadn't opened before. The weathered leather box bore symbols from multiple religious traditions: Catholic, Orthodox, Kabbalah, even ancient Sumerian wards. In 30 years of investigating the paranormal, we've collected artifacts for contingencies we hoped never to face, Ed explained as he unlocked the case with a key he wore around his neck. This is one of those contingencies. Inside lay items of power gathered from around the world: a silver dagger blessed by the Patriarch of Constantinople, vials of water from 7 sacred rivers, a rosary made from olive wood grown in Gethsemane, parchment inscribed with the 72 names of God, and at the center, a small iron box containing what appeared to be soil mixed with ash. "From the sanctuary at Fatima," Lorraine explained, seeing Eleanor's questioning look. "Ground where a divine manifestation occurred." Ed worked methodically, laying out the items on the dashboard. "We're not dealing with a standard demonic entity, so standard exorcism rites won't work. We need to go deeper, older. What exactly are we facing?" Eleanor asked, her voice hollow with exhaustion and fear. Lorraine's expression darkened. "Based on what I've seen psychically and what the entity revealed, we're dealing with beings that exist outside our dimensional reality. They perceive our universe as we might view an aquarium, and they're hungry," Ed added grimly. "Entities like this don't just want to possess humans, they want to consume souls. Jessica isn't just being possessed, she's being reconfigured as a permanent doorway." Lorraine reached for her husband's journal. "Remember the texts we studied at the Vatican Secret Archives? The apocryphal accounts of St. Thomas?" Ed nodded. "The 7 seals of the abyss. Not hell as modern Christianity conceptualizes it, but something much older, gaps in reality where entities from outside can enter under specific conditions." "7 doors, 7 souls," Eleanor whispered, recalling the entity's words. "The literature speaks of living doorways," Lorraine continued. "Humans transformed into permanent thresholds between realities. Once all 7 doors are opened within the vessel, the entities can enter our world permanently," Ed finished. "And based on the astronomical calculations in those church plans, that convergence happens at midnight tonight." Ed called Father Thomas again, but as expected, he refused to come. Instead, he promised to coordinate remote prayers from other priests and send emergency supplies. Within an hour, a pale young seminarian arrived with a package, refusing to exit his car or approach the property line. Inside the package, they found additional blessed items, including communion wafers consecrated by a bishop and vials of chrism. Oil, most importantly. There was a leather-bound journal, Father Donahue's personal diary recovered from the rectory after the fire. The priest's increasingly frantic entries detailed his discovery of the church's true purpose. He had found the ancient copper pipes while renovating the basement pipes inscribed with symbols that matched ancient star charts. Following the pipes, he discovered that they formed a pattern beneath the church foundation that aligned perfectly with the 7 stones in the garden. This building wasn't constructed as a house of God. His final entry read, Asterisk, it's a machine. A focusing device designed to channel cosmic energy during a specific alignment that occurs every 27 years. The Winters family has been its caretakers for generations. I've decided to burn it all down before the cycle can complete. May God forgive me, but this doorway must remain closed. Asterisk, armed with this knowledge, Ed outlined their plan of action. We need to disrupt the energy flow between the 7 focal points. Based on Father Donahue's diagrams, each stone in the garden connects to a specific location in the house. These blessed items might not repel the entities directly, Lorraine added, but they can create barriers of consecrated energy that might interrupt the ritual machinery. Eleanor, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. There's a pattern to when Jessica's episodes are strongest. They intensify whenever she's near Richard or the twins. The anchors, Ed realized. Richard and the twins are stabilizing her transformation. If we can separate them, we might be able to weaken the doorway enough for Jessica to fight back. Lorraine finished. As dusk approached, they prepared themselves, both physically and spiritually. Ed explained the hierarchy of dimensional entities based on texts from multiple religious traditions, from the Judeo-Christian concept of angels and demons to Hindu cosmology of lokas and beings that exist between planes of reality. These entities exist in a space our minds can't properly comprehend, he explained. They need to transform human biology to create interfaces they can work through. Eleanor listened with growing dread as she committed to memory the protection prayers Ed taught her. She practiced drawing the ceiling symbols that might help contain the energies being channeled through her family. What happens to them if we succeed? She asked finally. Can they be saved? The Warrens exchanged a look that sent ice through Eleanor's veins. Richard may be too far gone, Lorraine said gently. His transformation appears nearly complete. The twins, there's hope. As for Jessica, she's the key to everything, Ed interjected. If we can reach her consciousness, help her fight from within, she might be able to close the doorways already opening inside her. They assembled 7 packages, each containing blessed items that would be placed at the energy focal points. Throughout the property, as darkness fell completely, the stars emerged in configurations that shouldn't have been possible. Constellations visible from their location began shifting, forming new patterns that made Lorraine gasp when she glanced upward. The alignment is accelerating, she whispered. We don't have until midnight. It's happening now. As if in response, the house before them shuddered violently. The walls bulged outward before contracting, like a massive organism taking a breath. The windows glowed with an unnatural blue light, and the temperature around them plummeted so rapidly that frost formed on the vehicle's windows. It's time, Ed said, distributing the blessed items among them. Remember, we're not trying to destroy the entities. We couldn't even if we wanted to. We're trying to disrupt the machinery that allows them to enter our reality. As they approached the house, the front door swung open on its own. The twins stood in the doorway, their small forms backlit by pulsing blue light. Their eyes remained solid black, and their movements were synchronized as they extended their hands in welcome. The worthy servants arrived with their trinkets. They said in perfect unison, "The living doorway awaits your witness." Behind them, something moved in the shadows. Something with too many limbs and a face that shifted between multiple configurations simultaneously. "Remember the plan," Ed whispered to the others. "No matter what you see or hear, focus on the focal points. The twins smiled with impossible wideness. 7 doors, 7 souls, they intoned. The second door opens now. From deep within the house came Jessica's scream, not of pain, but transformation. The house had become something else entirely. As they stepped inside, reality bent around them. The interior had expanded, impossibly corridors stretched for hundreds of feet, when the building's exterior couldn't possibly contain them. The ceilings soared upward into darkness, support beams twisting like wooden serpents. The walls pulsed with a wet, organic rhythm. Beneath peeling wallpaper, symbols crawled like insects just below the surface. "Stay focused," Ed whispered, clutching the satchel of blessed artifacts. "Don't let your perception be manipulated." The twins led them through the transformed house. With perfect synchronization, their feet never quite touching the writhing floor. Behind them, the thing that had once been Richard followed, its elongated form folding and unfolding as it moved. The living room had transformed into a cathedral-like chamber. At its center floated Jessica, suspended 6 feet above the floor. Her body had become a living contradiction, parts recognizably human, while others had transformed into something else. Her abdomen had split open along a vertical seam, revealing not organs but a swirling vortex of geometric shapes and light that hurt the eyes to look upon directly. Around her, reality had thinned. Through these transparent areas, glimpses of something vast moved on the other side, entities of incomprehensible geometry, watching from beyond the veil. 7 doors, 7 souls, Jessica intoned, her voice a chorus of countless others. The second door opens. Her black eyes reflected the swirling vortex within her abdomen. "You've brought the final key." "What key?" Ed demanded. Jessica smiled. Unnaturally, the demonologist and his psychic wife. "Did you think you were called here by chance? The bloodline has guided you to us." Eleanor, Richard's distorted voice called from the shadows. "Tell them about your family, about your grandmother." Eleanor's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" "Your maiden name. Tell them, Collins," she whispered. "My maiden name was Collins." Ed's eyes widened. "The Collins family of West Bedford, the ones who founded the original church," Lorraine finished. "Eleanor, your bloodline is connected to this place too. 2 bloodlines, carefully maintained, brought together in this generation," the Richard thing exulted. "Winters and Collins keepers and keys. The perfect children could only come from both lineages." The twins, Eleanor realized, with mounting horror, and Jessica is the culmination. Jessica's many voices confirmed. Born under the perfect alignment of the perfect bloodlines, in the perfect vessel. The house shuddered as blue light erupted from Jessica's transformed abdomen. The twins began to chant in an unknown language, their hands raised toward their sister. From Jessica's open torso, something began to emerge, not a physical entity, but a thinning of reality itself, a door opening between dimensions. "Now, Ed," Lorraine cried out. Ed threw the first blessed artifact, silver crucifix containing soil from holy sites, toward one of the pulsing nodes visible in the corner of the room. It flared with brilliant white light, disrupting the blue energy flowing through the house. The twins screamed in unison, their back-to-back posture breaking. The Richard thing howled with a voice that contained multitudes. "The focal points," Ed shouted to Eleanor, who clutched her own satchel of blessed items. "Place them at the nodes." Eleanor darted toward another pulsing node near the fireplace. The house fought against her floorboards curling upward, walls bulging to block her path. She persisted, slamming a vial of holy water into the node. Another flare of white light disrupted the cosmic machinery. Jessica's suspended form convulsed. "Stop," the chorus of voices roared, shaking the foundations. "You cannot prevent what has been ordained for eons." The twins moved with blurring speed to block Lorraine's path to the third node. Their faces had begun to split along the center, revealing the same swirling vortex visible in Jessica's abdomen. "My children," Eleanor whispered. "Not anymore," they replied in unison. "We are the anchors. We hold the doorway open." Lorraine raised her rosary, reciting a prayer in ancient Aramaic. The twins recoiled just enough for her to place a blessed artifact at the third node. The cosmic machine destabilized. The room began to fold in on itself, dimensions collapsing and reforming. Through the thinned areas of reality, the watching entities became more visible, vast forms of shifting geometry and too many limbs, pressing against the veil separating worlds. Ed fought his way toward Jessica. The wretched thing intercepted him, its body now barely recognizably, writhing mass of limbs and faces that shifted constantly. The doorway could not be closed once opened. It said with Richard's mouth, while other faces spoke different words simultaneously. "Watch me," Ed growled, thrusting his most powerful artifact, the iron box containing soil from Fatima, directly into the mass of the wretched thing. The entity shrieked with a sound that transcended human hearing, causing blood to trickle from their ears. The wretched thing collapsed into a pool of writhing symbols that rapidly evaporated. Ed reached Jessica's suspended form. Up close, her transformation was even more apparent. Her humanity remained only in fragments. One eye still brown, a patch of normal skin on her cheek, 5 fingers on her left hand, while her right had become something with too many joints. "Jessica," Ed called, "you can fight this. The doorway isn't fully formed yet." Jessica's human eye focused on him. "Mr. Warren," she gasped with her own voice. "They're inside me. So many of them. Fight them, Jessica. Your mum is disrupting the energy flow. You can close the doors they've opened inside you." The house shook as Eleanor placed the fourth blessed artifact. The walls bled black fluid that rose upward against gravity. The twins screamed as their synchronized link destabilized. Through the thinning veil, the watching entities became frenzied, pressing harder against the dimensional barrier. "I can see them," Jessica whispered, her human eye wide with cosmic terror. "They've been watching us forever, waiting for the right vessel." "Close the door, Jessica," Ed urged. "I don't know how." Lorraine joined them, her psychic senses fully opened despite the agony it caused her. "The symbols on your skin, they're a contract. Reject it, Jessica." As Eleanor placed the 5th blessed artifact, the twins collapsed, their bodies convulsing as the anchor connection weakened. The vortex in Jessica's abdomen began to pulse erratically. "The alignment peaks now," Lorraine cried out, pointing to the ceiling which had become transparent, revealing impossible constellations in a perfect pattern. "Jessica, it has to be now." Jessica's human eye closed in concentration. Her remaining human hand moved to the edge of the vortex within her abdomen. "I revoke the covenant," she whispered. I closed the door. The entities beyond the veil went berserk, pressing against the thinning reality. One massive appendage, like a limb but wrong in ways the human mind couldn't process, pushed partially through, reaching for Jessica. "The 6th node," Ed shouted to Eleanor, who was struggling against the house itself. Eleanor slammed the 6th blessed artifact into position. The appendage recoiled as if burned, retreating through the thinning veil. Jessica screamed a single, human sound of determination. The vortex within her began to close, reality thickening as the doorway started to seal. The house shook violently, cracks appearing as the cosmic machine broke down. "One more," Ed gasped, blood streaming from his nose and ears. The seventh node completes the disruption. The final node pulsed at the center of the room, beneath Jessica's suspended form. Eleanor struggled toward it, the last artifact clutched in her hand, as the house bent space to prevent her approach. "Mum," Jessica called, her voice stronger. "More human. Throw it to me." Eleanor threw the final artifact upward. Time slowed as it arced through the impossible space. Jessica's human hand stretched downward, catching it. "I reject you," she said, with final clarity. I closed the seventh door. She drove the artifact into the center of the vortex within her abdomen. Reality shattered. When reality reassembled itself, the world had changed. The house still stood, but its interior had become a fractured mosaic of spaces that shouldn't connect, kitchen walls opening onto bedroom ceilings, stairways leading both up and down simultaneously. The laws of physics struggled to reassert themselves in a space that had been fundamentally corrupted. Ed regained consciousness on what had once been the living room floor. Blood trickled from his ears and nose, and his visions swam with overlapping perceptions. He could see both the physical room and something else layered atop it. A geometric pattern of energies that pulsed with each heartbeat. "Lorraine," he called, his voice distorted in his own ears. "Here," she responded weakly. "Ed, I can see them clearly now. The veil is torn." Lorraine knelt nearby, her pupils dilated to the point that her eyes appeared black, not possessed, but seeing beyond normal human perception. Blood streaked from her nose, but her attention remained fixed on something invisible to ordinary sight. "The seventh node disrupted their ritual machinery," she explained, "but reality itself has been compromised in this location." They found Eleanor unconscious but alive, curled protectively around the twins' small forms. The children appeared human again, though their skin remained marked with fading symbols. Of Jessica and what had once been Richard, there was no sign. "Above us," Lorraine whispered, pointing toward what should have been the ceiling, but now appeared as a swirling maelstrom of fractured light. Suspended at its center was Jessica, still partially transformed, her body a battleground between human and other. The vortex in her abdomen had partially closed, but reality continued to thin around her, allowing glimpses of what lay beyond. The entities watched from the other side, their vast, incomprehensible forms pressing against the weakened barrier like monstrous fish against aquarium glass. Jessica's eyes, one human, one solid black, fixed on them. "It's not over," she said, her voice fluctuating between her own and the chorus of others. "The seventh door is closing, but slowly. They're fighting to keep it open." Richard, or what remained of him, coalesced nearby, grotesquely elongated, his skin translucent enough to reveal the symbols flowing beneath. "The worthy vessel resists," he said, his voice resonating unnaturally. "But the bloodlines have fulfilled their purpose. The connection is established. Jessica, you can reject them completely," Ed urged. "You've already started the process." "How?" she cried. "There, inside me now. Part of me." Lorraine focused her psychic abilities despite the agony it caused her. "Ed, I can see the structure of what they've done. The 7 doors correspond to 7 aspects of human consciousness. They've rewritten her on a fundamental level. Then we need to perform a true exorcism, Ed realized. Not of a possessing entity, but of the alterations they've made to her very being. The wretched thing laughed, a sound that caused dust to fall from the broken ceiling. You cannot exorcise what has been integrated. The transformation may be incomplete, but it is irreversible. The twins stirred in Eleanor's arms, their eyes fluttering open simultaneously. Unlike before, they appeared confused, disoriented. "Mum," Elias murmured, his voice his own for the first time in days. "The anchors have destabilized," the wretched thing hissed, "but the primary doorway remains." "You never loved us," Eleanor said with quiet revelation. "It was all for this." "Love is a human construct," it replied dispassionately. "The bloodlines serve a greater purpose. The connection goes both ways," Lorraine suddenly whispered. "Jessica isn't just a doorway for them to enter our world. She's also a doorway for us to affect theirs." Ed turned to Eleanor. "Your bloodline connection matters. The twins broke free because of you. Your love was stronger than the entity's control. Jessica needs that same connection." Eleanor stepped forward. "Jessica, baby, remember when you were 10 and you had nightmares about shadows watching you? I told you they weren't real." "But they were," Jessica's chorus of voices replied. "They've always been watching." "That doesn't matter," Eleanor insisted. "What matters is that you fought them even then. You sensed what was happening and you resisted." Above them, the entities beyond the thinning veil became agitated, pressing harder against the barrier. Ed began an ancient exorcism rite, combining elements from multiple religious traditions focused on severing imposed connections. Lorraine joined him, adding her psychic strength to his spiritual authority. "Jessica Elizabeth Winters," Ed intoned. "These entities have no legitimate claim to your soul or your body. They have altered you without consent, violated the sanctity of your being without authority." The wretched thing moved toward them with unnatural speed, but found itself blocked by an invisible barrier created by the twins. Their small faces were set with determination as they focused their remaining connection against their former anchor. "The vessel is ours," it howled. "The covenant is sealed." "No covenant made through deception is binding," Lorraine countered, blood flowing freely from her nose. "Jessica, they've connected themselves to you, but you can use that connection against them." Jessica's human eye widened with sudden understanding. "The symbol's eye can read them now. They're afraid." "What are they afraid of?" Eleanor asked. "Being trapped here," Jessica replied, her voice stronger, more human. "Their dimension is vast, with endless resources. Ours is small, limited. They want to consume us, not join us." Ed continued the exorcism, focusing on reversing the energy flow. "By your own connection, by your own covenant, you are bound to the laws of this reality while you attempt to enter it." The space around them shuddered. Through the thinning veil, the entities began to withdraw, pulling back as they sensed the trap closing. "Push them back," Jessica, Lorraine urged. "Use their connection against them." Jessica's body contorted as she focused her will. The symbols beneath her skin began to flow in reverse, the vortex in her abdomen contracting further. "I am not your door," she declared, her voice solely her own now. "I revoke access. I terminate the covenant." The wretched thing screamed as its form destabilized. "The vessel cannot reject us. The bloodline fulfilled its purpose." "My blood, my choice," Jessica countered. With visible effort, she began to push energy back through the connection, turning the doorway against its creators. The entities beyond The veil recoiled in cosmic panic. The barrier between realities strengthened, thickening as the forced thinning reversed itself. "It's working," Eleanor cried, watching as Jessica's body began to normalize, the inhuman elements receding. With a final surge of will, Jessica closed her eyes and made a pushing motion with both hands, now fully human again. "Get out of my world." The vortex collapsed completely. The wretched thing imploded with a sound that transcended human hearing, dissolving into rapidly dissipating symbols. The fractured reality of the house began to restabilize, spaces reconnecting. In proper physical relationships, Jessica fell from her suspended position. Ed caught her before she hit the floor. The barrier had sealed, the entities banished back to their own dimension. But as Jessica opened her eyes, both human again, Ed saw knowledge there that no human was meant to possess. "They're gone," she whispered, "but they'll look for another way, another doorway." The house gave one final shudder as the last of the cosmic machinery powered down. The 7 nodes throughout the property went dark simultaneously. In the restored silence, they all sensed a truth too terrible to speak aloud. What had been glimpsed could never be unseen, and what had been opened never completely closed. 3 weeks later, the Winters property stood abandoned, surrounded by chain-link fencing and official condemned notices. The church's steeple had collapsed during that final night, crushing part of the roof. From the outside, it looked like structural failure, nothing more. In a modest hotel room 30 miles away, Eleanor sat between the twins' beds, reading them a bedtime story. They appeared normal now, the symbols completely faded from their skin, though occasionally they still spoke in unison without realizing it. The doctors had found nothing physically wrong with them, attributing their synchronized behavior to the trauma they'd experienced. A soft knock at the door announced the Warrens. Ed looked haggard, aged beyond his years by what they'd witnessed. Lorraine's psychic sensitivity had been dangerously heightened by the encounter. She now wore specially tinted glasses to filter the world around her, which remained layered with glimpses of what existed beyond normal perception. "How is she?" Eleanor asked quietly, stepping into the hallway. "Stable," Ed replied. "The physical transformations have reversed completely. Medically speaking, she's perfectly healthy. And the other aspects," Eleanor pressed. Lorraine removed her glasses, revealing eyes that still held the shadow of what they had witnessed. "The knowledge remains." She saw beyond the veil, Eleanor. Some things can't be unseen. Inside a private room at St. Mary's Hospital, Jessica sat by the window, sketching in a notebook. Father Thomas visited daily, though he still refused to discuss what had happened at the property. The church had quietly dispatched investigators, who worked alongside the Warrens, documenting everything for records that would be sealed in Vatican archives. "We've secured a new home for you," Ed informed Eleanor. "A place in Vermont, far from any known thin spots in reality. The church will cover all expenses." "And Richard?" Eleanor asked, though she already knew the answer. "There's nothing left of him," Lorraine said gently. "The entity consumed him completely long before our confrontation. He may have been gone for years, perhaps even before you met him." Eleanor nodded, having suspected as much. "The Collins and Winters bloodlines," she murmured. "How many generations were manipulated?" "We've traced it back to the 1660s, Ed explained. "Both families guided toward each other over centuries. Genetic markers preserved and enhanced through selective pairings. You and Richard were the culmination, and my children are the continuation," Eleanor finished for him. "They'll never..." stop looking for them, will they? Neither Warren contradicted her. Inside Jessica's hospital room, the teenager closed her sketchbook as the others entered. Her appearance was normal, again a pretty 16-year-old, with no outward sign of her ordeal, but her eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before, knowledge no human was meant to possess. "I can still see them sometimes," she said without preamble. "Not as clearly, but they're there. Watching, waiting." Lorraine sat beside her, taking the girl's hands. "The doorway is closed, Jessica." "You closed it." "Not completely, Jessica," replied softly. "They showed me things while I was ... connected. There are other thin spots, other potential doorways. 7 major ones across the world." Ed exchanged a concerned glance with Lorraine. "We should discuss this later." "No," Jessica insisted. "You need to know now. They'll try again. The alignment was perfect this time, but there will be others. They're patient. They can wait centuries." She opened her sketchbook, revealing drawings of locations none of them recognized. The monastery perched on a mountainside, a lighthouse. On a desolate coast, a cave formation in what appeared to be a desert. "I can feel them," she continued. "The other potential vessels. Some don't know what they are yet, but they will." "Jessica," Eleanor began, concern evident in her voice. "I'm not crazy, Mom," Jessica interrupted. "I've changed, not physically anymore, but I understand things now. I can help the Warrens find the others before it's too late." Ed studied the drawings carefully. "Some of these match locations on our watch list, places with abnormal paranormal activity that never quite manifested into full haunting. Because they're not hauntings," Jessica said. "They're preparation." 1 month later, the Warrens' Occult Museum had a new sealed display case. Inside lay 7 small stone fragments recovered from the garden of the Winters property, the remains of the altar stones, even sealed behind blessed glass and surrounded by protective symbols. Visitors reported feeling watched whenever they stood near the display. Eleanor and the twins had settled into their new home in Vermont. The children were enrolled in school. Under a different surname, their past carefully obscured by documentation provided by grateful church officials. Jessica had begun working with the Warrens, her unique insights helping them identify and investigate potential thin spots around the world. Her drawings had led them to 3 locations already, where they had disrupted preparations similar to what had occurred at the converted church. In the museum's research room, Ed added a final note to the case file labeled "The Doorway Investigation" before sealing it with special locks. Asterisk, what we witnessed was not a standard haunting or possession, but something far more ancient and dangerous, an attempted incursion from entities that exist beyond our dimensional reality. While this particular doorway has been closed, Jessica Winters confirms that others exist. The entities continue to watch and wait for another opportunity. Asterisk. Asterisk, most disturbing is the revelation that Jessica retains knowledge from her time as a partial doorway knowledge that may prove essential in preventing future incursions, but which also marks her permanently. She sees things we cannot, senses preparations we would otherwise miss. The church has classified this case at the highest level of secrecy. The property has been purchased and will be razed, the ground salted and blessed. But the entities themselves cannot be destroyed, only kept at bay. The fact remains that for a brief time, a doorway to something beyond hell was partially opened. And as Jessica reminds us daily, what has been glimpsed can never be unseen, and what has been opened never completely closed. Asterisk, in her bedroom in Vermont, Jessica woke suddenly from a dream, sweat-soaked and trembling. On her nightstand, her phone lit up with a text from Lorraine Warren. "We know, we felt it too. It's beginning again." Jessica looked to her window, where frost had formed despite the summer heat. In the ice crystals, symbols had appeared, the same symbols that had once crawled beneath her skin. Somewhere in the world, another doorway was beginning to open.